Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to the latest edition of Founder and Friends. My name is John Daniel Trask. I am the co-founder and CEO of Raygun, and today I am joined by one of my besties, Sean Chapman. Howdy, Sean. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. Thanks, JD.
Yeah. Sean is one of the principal engineers at Raygun, and he joined us this year, and he's been overseeing our API project, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a moment. But I thought, Sean, I also give you a moment to tell everybody a little bit about yourself so they can be friends with you too.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks, JD. Yeah, I'm Sean. I've been at Raygun for just shy of 6 months now. In that time, mostly been working on that API project, as you kind of alluded to. I've been a long time Raygun user outside of that. So before that, absolutely love the platform. And when you came to me and said, "Hey, we've got a job opportunity," I jumped on it. So excited to be here and building stuff for obviously devs like me.
Yep, and we're grateful to have you, mate. Sean, by the way, back in the day, he built a great little utility called Audio Switcher that I was a big user of for making it easier to change the audio outputs on your Windows machines. It was a pretty popular utility around the traps. So
Yeah, that was a fun one that came up through just a friend saying this is really difficult, and then spent a weekend on it, and there you go, a little product out in the wild.
Yep. Well, I mean, there's software development 101 right there, right? Find a problem, solve it. And so that was exactly what we kind of were looking at a couple of years ago with Raygun and thinking about, where do we take the product? And there is an element of always, listen to the customers. They'll tell you what they want. And then there's a little bit of, what's our vision and where do we want to take things? And hopefully they kind of roughly align. And obviously we have a lot, thousands and thousands of developer customers out there using the platform. And because we do work with so many developers, it seemed like a good idea to really open up our API. And so historically, if you're unfamiliar, Raygun is not one of these heavily venture-backed companies, but it's been around for a long time. It's a profitable business. And so when we first launched the business, we built an API to obviously ingest a lot of data. We deal with billions of crash reports, billions of user sessions, APM traces, those sorts of things. But we never built an API to actually automate the platform and do custom integrations, which at the time, quite a few years ago now, didn't seem like we were missing too much. And it's clearly become a bigger and bigger thing that developers want to be able to leverage these platforms. And our sort of vision is that the stream of data that these observability type tools provide can actually be used to do some fantastical things around business processes and help our customers really get a heck of a lot more value out of the information that's in there. So we've more recently just launched our new API. This is what today's Founder and Friends is about. And we've got some very early customers on board with that using it. I'd like to say at the end of this session, there is a Q&A. Please drop any questions as you're going. And if you'd like early access, also let us know. We're happy to bring folks on with that as well. And so part of that vision, is that not only can Raygun ingest your data, but you can start querying it. You can start doing things like automating the creation of applications within Raygun and then sending errors to it, for example, from your CI/CD environment. And maybe then if there's any new errors, leave the app there or delete the app programmatically. All that sort of cool stuff is coming. And it's been really amazing, even just hearing some of the stories from customers on what they could build. But that's a lot of talking from me, and it's better to hear from my friends. So, Sean, do you want to tell us a little bit about your sort of outlook on the API, how you started thinking about this for launch? Keeping in mind, everybody, we kind of build a little bit in public here. So, we're not talking about the finalized end vision of our API. It's an ongoing project. So, yeah, Sean, what was your views on it?
That's absolutely right. So yeah, something to keep in note that this is kind of the first iteration on it, and there's going to be so many more iterations, so many more endpoints to come. One of the core foundations is to build the spec first. So similar to how you might be doing, test-driven design or domain-driven design, designing that spec, because that's the spec that developers talk in. So making sure that that makes sense to developers and people that want to use our API. So we're starting at that point. We're creating those endpoints before we even think about writing a line of code. We start with that open API spec, which is all hosted in Swagger, so everyone can jump into that. And then once that makes sense, we can actually start to reason about how that API works in the background. And this also means that once we have everything there, that API first design means that we can leverage that within Raygun. So we'll be using the exact same API that our customers will be using to do all the functions when we actually publicly release it. So that's one of the core values of how we're actually designing this API, to make sure that we can use it ourselves as well as it's really useful for our customers.
Yeah, and I think I read something a while ago from Steve Yegi on his platforms rant that he accidentally posted publicly on Google Plus while he worked at Google, and he talked about the rules for platforms and that API first approach, really saying that Raygun needs to use its own API. We can't have two. So you can't have like a backdoor. You can't have your own direct access. You can't have Sean, remote desktop to the production database and just punch stuff in there. We have to use those same APIs. So in a way, as much as this is about a feature for customers, it's also about the slow rebuilding of our own platform to then call those APIs and how we work on that from, knowing whether we're the caller, the customer's the caller, same code path. And for those of you interested in that topic, I do recommend just Googling Steve Yegi platform rant, and you'll find it. He's got a few rules in there around it. But it just helps make sure that the one API, like we continually fix and improve things, we fix it for customers and ourselves at the same time. It's a really powerful combo.
Yeah, I'm really excited just to be able to leverage that API. Obviously, as a long-term user of Raygun, being able to build upon the data that sits in Raygun is huge value, just as a customer. So yeah, being able to provide that data to all of our customers in a way that is programmatic, you don't have to do anything about it. You kind of mentioned creating and deleting applications, some really good scenarios around there. If anyone's using kind of Terraform or infrastructure as code, if you think about spinning up your kind of test environments, you can actually create those applications and throw them away with Terraform, everything in there. So that's kind of a grand vision of where we want to get to, as well as also, inspecting all the data that's coming in, or your crash, your run data, your APM data. So that's kind of the grand vision.
And it certainly plays true. There's that saying that, once you provide the building blocks that are out there, you can't imagine all the ways that customers will use those systems. And that's the bit that really excites me, is even seeing these early adoption scenarios. Some of them fairly obvious. Some of them you're like, oh, that's a great idea. We should borrow that for our own business. So yeah, it's really cool. Cool. So why don't we jump a little bit to sharing a wee bit of what you've got there? So we do have a screen share.
Absolutely.
Yep. It's great because in these founder and friends, I'm the one that doesn't do the live demo. So these are like totally stress-free for me, but pressure's on Sean. So
thanks very much, JD. So hopefully everyone can see that and we're in here. So I'm just going to show you how you get started. So we've got documentation already up and live. So you can head over to our Raygun documentation site. It's down here under Raygun public API. So that's under the product guides. And this will give you some kind of getting started information. So this has some really good, useful links in here as well. If we follow the spec, I'll get to that later on. And we've got our personal access tokens, which I will touch on, which is how we are securing our API access. And we also have our endpoints down here with just a simple list and the scopes required. So we've got 6 API endpoints up at the moment. Obviously, kind of touched on, there's so many more to come. This is going to be the one API for Raygun. We're going to use it ourselves. So everything that you can imagine you're doing through the Raygun console, through the web app, everything is going to be available in this API as well for everyone to use. Now, we're using personal access tokens to authenticate ourselves with the API. So if you've got access to the early access of the API, you'll be able to see this under your My Settings page in Raygun. So
hey, would you mind zooming it in a little bit there, Sean?
Oh, yes,
just
I can,
a fraction.
absolutely.
It's kind of readable, but it might be a bit of a stretch on smaller ones. Thank you.
Hopefully that's all good for you guys. Yep. Perfect. And I'll zoom in here as well. So personal access tokens are how we're authenticating with the API. I'll run through what that means. So a personal access token is almost a password. So treat these like a password into your account and the account that has access into your Raygun data. So it's very important to stress that these are effectively passwords. So you shouldn't be sharing them. They shouldn't be public. These will give people access into all of the Raygun data that your user account has access to.
So treat it like any other secret,
Exactly.
If you're using secrets managers or however you're doing your config management, whether you don't want to check them into source control, all of those good things. Yep. Gotcha.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So to find this will be under your settings inside Raygun. So over here under My Settings, when you have access to it, you will see a nice new tab personal access tokens. From in here, you can create your token and give it a nice name. So if I go founder and friends, demo token, you can choose an expiration date, not expiring tokens, or anything up to 90 days, and give it only the scopes that you require access to. Don't give it more than what it needs. So obviously, we've only got read and write for applications at the moment, but there will be a huge swath of scopes coming. So make sure that you secure your tokens and only give it access to the data that you actually want. For this purpose, I'm going to give it read and write access.
Basically, the principle of least privilege, right? We always, with any sort of security scenario, never more than you actually need is a good practice just to stay safe.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right.
See, I still remember a little bit about coding.
I've seen some PRs from you in the last few days. I see you've put code into our code base.
Creating a lot of technical debt.
Cool. Yeah, so once that, you'll get a token here. It's obfuscated, so not everyone can pull tokens, but you'll be able to copy that. Now, it's important to note that once this is copied, you won't see it ever again. So a personal access token is almost a one-time password that you need to manage. There'll be no way that we can recover that password into there, or that token, or you can do it as well. So please note that you've really got to copy it from here, and once you've got a handle on it, keep it forever. Put it in your one password, put it in your secrets manager, that kind of thing.
So if you do lose it, basically, don't contact us, create a new token.
Yes, if you do lose it, you can regenerate the token. So
excellent.
And you'll get a new token, but that flow is still in there. So yes.
Yeah. That is generally our principle, by the way. We're well known for having great support, but our focus is always on how do we ensure that the product is actually intuitive to our users. So hopefully that's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, absolutely. So anyone that's kind of familiar with things like GitHub, they'll also have personal access tokens, and this should become pretty much second nature to you if you've used personal access tokens on something like the GitHub API. A lot of the kind of ways that we're doing it should be industry standard, and you should kind of be able to be familiar with everything that you see here. So that's a personal access token. This is the thing that gets you into the API. Now I'm going to pull up the spec as well. So we actually have a hosted Swagger spec. This is all public. You can jump in there right now. We're at API raygun.com v3/Swagger, and this will give you a fully interactive and visual experience of the API. And obviously this thing is going to grow out. And from here, you can inspect everything that you can do with the application. So here, all of our endpoints and what they're going to return, the error codes, as you'd expect in a full Open API spec. We also have that JSON spec as well, which is the Open API spec.
Slightly harder to read.
Yeah, I wouldn't read this one.
Yep.
Yeah, not worth that one. Definitely so much nicer looking at this auto-generated UI. So this should be a really nice experience for all of the developers getting started and using those personal access tokens. Now, from those humble beginnings, we can kind of see that I've created some Postman endpoints as well. So if anyone's familiar or not familiar with Postman, it kind of just allows you to call HTTP requests in a nice kind of electronified UI. So from here, you can see that I've just created endpoints for all of those endpoints in that spec. And I'm just going to do some calls to it as well. So given those tokens, I can actually authenticate with that part in the application. And you can see that I get back data. So this is my test account, so I don't really have anything useful in here. You guys can go ahead and scrape whatever you want. It's not going to get you anything. But we can actually do more and more with this as well. So we can obviously get by application ID. So if I want to work with demo application, I can then get it using the application ID. So now I've got that one single application. Now, this is really useful for those people that have a huge amount of applications on their Raygun plan, and they actually want to find out maybe what data has been sent to it, who has access. This is a really good audit chain and allows you to just query information out of your account rather than kind of manually going through the web UI. So hopefully this becomes really useful for our customers. Now we can also...
I was just going to say, I know exactly that scenario from a few customers I've spoken to, which, as you say, it's quite hard to build a user interface where, some customers, it's a brand new startup with one app, and then another organization in some cases are hosting thousands of apps through Raygun. And I know one such customer was saying exactly that. They're like, we've got all these teams and I just want to make sure that actually like Raygun crash reporting is set up in all of these apps. So seeing that, has it received any data is a good check for that. And it does. It means that people can break out a little bit from maybe the confines of a web UI for what they need.
Yeah, that's right. It just gives you another avenue to really explore what you've got set up in Raygun and how you're using it.
Yep.
Another use case that's come up is, hey, I've got this API key that sends stuff to Raygun, but I don't know what application it's sending it to. So we can actually use one of our endpoints here, and we've just got applications, and it's just a get by API key. So if I want to plug in, I've got an unknown API key, and I want to plug that in, and I want to figure out what application it's actually sending data to. I can now do that via the API. So I don't have to go searching through the UI, clicking through all of the different menus to try and find that API key. I can just put it straight into the API, and I get exactly that information back out. Oh, it's demo application, and that's perfect. So now I know one step exactly what it's going to. We've also got regenerating application API key as well. So for those security conscious, that obviously those API keys, you may want to cycle them on a more regular basis or have an automated process that updates your kind of managed secrets and updates those API keys on an automated kind of schedule. You can actually do this via the API right now. So
Yep.
given that API, so we can throw in an application identifier. So grab that identifier, pop that as part of the call, and you can see here it's returned and it's regenerated an API key and it's different to the last time. Just to make sure that it is actually different, we've got AAN, fire it again, T5A. So that thing is going to cycle your application API keys and allow you to update and rotate secrets on a kind of a more regular basis if that suits your kind of security policy in your organization.
Nice. Handy. We do get that. We do have that ability through the UI and the app, but it is a fairly common ask in there as well. Like, what can I do to recycle this? Yep.
Absolutely, and it's just giving our users the flexibility to do it either via the web UI or they can do it via the API as well. So there's two ways to kind of now approach that problem. Now we also have kind of I'll touch on it very quickly because we have an open API spec. So that big long blob of JSON that I kind of switched on before, we can actually use tools to generate SDKs for us as well. So there's a really popular public API generator. So these things can be used and they just look at the spec and generate a client for you straight away. So I've got a couple of test clients that I've generated using that. Excuse my small terminal font. But I can just throw in there and I can say, I want to generate a Python client or I want to generate a C# client. And it actually just generates it straight off that spec and gives you full source code over it all. So what it ends up doing is, where are we? Open API gen. So we've got a Python client. I can open that in code. And now we have a full auto-generated SDK that pulls us into and builds up a top of our Raygun API as well. So you've got a fully typed, fully fleshed out, auto-generated SDK that gets you into our API.
I so wish I'd known about this project, or I'm not actually sure when it started, but when we first started Raygun, we obviously have about 25 SDKs that we built for every programming language and whatnot. Now, admittedly, there's some domain-specific logic depending on the platforms, but this would just be such a time saver. So really cool project to go and look into, especially, I know we have a lot of developers in the audience. If you're having to build SDKs as well, like really handy little project.
Yeah, it's a really great one, and I've used it in the past, and I know that they've got some really great documentation. This is their website. Do many different languages, hundreds of different languages, and yeah, it's just such a really nice way to integrate with an API that publishes that open API spec and generate the code that you need to generate if you don't want to go through that kind of hand rolled kind of coding process. So yeah, really cool.
Yep. Looks pretty straightforward, and I guess I can share with folks. So we launched this a couple of weeks ago. We've already done another round of putting out another handful of endpoints as well. Now that we are live with this and in this beta phase, as I say, can get in touch if you'd like early access. We're not restricting it too much, more just to make sure that we can engage and hear any feedback. But if that's you're welcome to jump in with that. But we'll probably get into that cycle of shipping new APIs, on a fairly common every couple of weeks sort of basis going forward in 2023. This is an enduring project at Raygun, which is why it will get a lot bigger. And a lot of the early work has been in putting in place those security bits, the life cycle handling, all of that. So it's really cool.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And part of the kind of core principles of the way we're designing that API was to be easily extensible. So we can, put different endpoints in there at kind of rapid pace. So as long as they make sense, that we've got everything speaked out. Yeah, it takes a small amount of time from our devs, and then we can create those endpoints for our users and customers to get in and start doing things.
Yeah, and we do have a pretty good idea of some of the core APIs that people have been asking for. Interestingly, like the application management has been high on the list. But if there's a specific API that would really make your day, do let us know as well. We'll always look at bumping that up the priority list to get it out there.
Yes, you can follow our documentation here as well. Kind of exactly what JD was saying. You can make a request for your API endpoints here. It'll take you to a Google form, and you can just fill out exactly what you're looking for. And everything is feature driven from our customers, so we prioritize that and make sure that we're actually delivering value to our customers.
Yep. And ultimately, one of the questions will be, what about long term? Can I actually get all of the data out? And that's another philosophy behind Raygun, is that we typically store the raw data form that we receive, and that's why we actually do have a lot of data that flows through our platform. But the plan is to open all of that up. We kind of always have the view that the data is yours. You might be lending it to us to hold, to present the information to you in a handy way, but it is yours, and you should be able to get that out and do things with it. Again, we have small customers where maybe the web UI is fine. We have massive customers where they might actually want to be able to pull the data into a data warehouse and have like a BI team really slicing and dicing stuff when they're at the really sophisticated end of the spectrum. So all of those sorts of things will be coming as well to access that.
Yes,
All right.
absolutely. And you mentioned creating and deleting applications. They're obviously not in this list right now.
Yep.
They're actually the next ones that are going to be delivered early next year. So we're going to start development as soon as we're back from the holiday break.
Yep.
And we'll be getting straight into create and delete applications, and then looking at things like team management. How do I add and remove permissions and people to teams and accessing things? So those are kind of things that are on our very short-term radar to get out to our customers.
Yep. Awesome. Cool, Sean. Is there anything else we want to cover on the API before we maybe jump to a couple of Q&A points?
No, hopefully that's given us a really good insight into everything there, but that's everything from my side.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you. Yeah, it's an interesting one to work on as well, because we, as I say, we haven't published an API other than receiving data. And what's interesting is we actually have quite a few packages that developers have built to send data to Raygun. So I'm really excited to see what people build in terms of open source on top of this with time. Cool. So we do have one question here that's popped up. What do you see the API looking like a year from now, Sean?
That's a great question. Now, we're obviously wanting a huge amount of endpoints, but we're also looking at authentication. So personal access tokens is our first way for customers to get an early step into the API. They're very simple to use. They're just one little token kind of bearer authentication that you can plug along and get started really, really quickly. What we want to do is start to expand that out as well. So looking at, OAuth 2 and OIDC authentication mechanisms, and being able to share those across more of the company. So not having just one user having access to specific things, but you can actually do things on behalf of other users. So that's definitely coming. Obviously, many, many more endpoints on that front. Exposing data. How do I, generate a report of my customers? All those things are coming.
Yep, absolutely. And we do have a little bit of an unrevealed vision here as well. Once this entire API strategy is sort of in place, is where we take Raygun from there in terms of opening it up even more. So I'm really excited about that for probably not 2023 for that part, probably 2024. But yeah, that's exciting. I'm excited at least. Cool. We've got another question here. Do you have any examples of how customers are and will be using the API? Now, we cited a couple of high-level ones today, but is there any others you'd like to share, Sean?
Yeah, I think the Terraform one is a highly requested one. So that's those customers that are using kind of infrastructure as code and spinning up environments that are transitive, throwing away at the drop of a hat. So
Yep.
those kind of creating applications and working in with that automated workflow is really critical. So that's definitely one use case that we're really focusing on early on. Obviously the auditing as well. So being able to look at what applications you have and who has access to them. So maybe if someone leaves your company, you maybe want to actually go, okay, what do they have access to? And being able to make those changes via the API as well. So yeah, it's a good discovery point for that as well.
Yeah, and we last year we launched our alerting, which technically has an API behind it, so it's going to end up getting surfaced through this capability soon. But we have a situation where we had a customer who they have a checkout flow, and people were trying to buy something and it failed, so an error occurs that prevented the checkout. Raygun's alerting system can then send the information about what was in the order to the store that would have sorted it out, so that they could contact the customer and say, hey, do you still want this order? And that was an example of a situation where I just think, man, that is so smart to leverage this data in that way to create really great customer experiences. And as engineers, as we do open up APIs, building those things becomes easier and easier and easier when you can leverage these services. Cool, we've got quite a few questions here. Are there any endpoints that you are particularly excited about being built, Sean? Like the audio switcher endpoint? No.
I wish integrate audio switcher into Raygun. Yep, perfect. From my perspective, it'd be really, really cool to be able to pull out crash and run data and actually do some analysis outside of it. So once you've seen our kind of insights in the Raygun web application, being able to do that and pipe it to maybe your own BI tools and have another analysis level over top of it, that's really powerful. That's something that really hits and makes my kind of brain go tingly with the good stuff that we could do with that kind of data.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's going to be cool. I also like this is just me. I obviously kind of keep a broad eye on the business, so sometimes it's just getting little updates, but getting those the ability to do maybe custom integrations, like actions that customers have taken within the app, and be able to build like a little bot that maybe pumps them into a Slack channel and be able to leverage that event data. I think that would be cool from my sort of standpoint. I've also been having a look at the possibility of opening up endpoints that are compatible with some of the BI tools, like say Power BI, which I think has a specification that if it can query an endpoint, you can write queries. And I think that would just be a really great way to sort of begin freeing up that customer data to do what you want with it. So I think that'd be cool. And we've got another one. How do I stay up to date with new endpoints being released? Yeah, well,
Great
we are going to
question.
be releasing a lot, so yes. How do we do that? How do we tell people?
Yeah, so you'll see it in our newsletters that go out as well. So every time we add API, there'll be an announcement around it. We want to publish a little bit more information, so going ahead and maybe a bit of a roadmap. But there'll be definitely information out there if you want to just keep up to date. Have a look at the spec, see what's kind of changing in that spec space. But we will have newsletter and announcements coming through.
Yeah, cool. And if you are an existing customer, like I say, you can just contact us if you'd like access. Also happy to organise a conversation with the team on actually getting access to that. Being that it is early on, as you'll all understand, as fellow builders, it is invaluable to hear the feedback from the users of a new system and be able to factor that into where we're taking things. Well, we're pretty much bang on time there, which is really well done. Thanks so much for joining us today, everybody. And thank you, Sean. You're the real star of the show. So thank you for that.
Thanks very much for having me, JD.
Well, my pleasure. And we'll see you in 2023, I think, with the next Founder and Friends. And really hope that for those of you that celebrate Christmas and are having a break through that time, that you have a great, safe Christmas. It's been a big year, tiring year. We're all ready for a little bit of a break. So we'll see you again in 2023. Catch you later.